Yes, Jim, I'm looking to avenge my situation in Survivor Series. You know, the outcome of Survivor Series was one for the All-American, and that was a great thing. You see, Borga stands for all the things that we don't care about and we don't want to know.
With all due respect, Mr. Steiner, do you care responding to the allegations made by Giselle Shaw?
No comments.
Drew, straight to elevator. Excuse me, sorry.
Everyone talks about Scott. Big Poppa Pump this, genetic freak that. But what about the other Steiner brother? The workhorse, the intensity machine. Rick Steiner was the heart of that team, but he was also a transphobic, racist, flawed man. Today we're discussing him for no right reasons. Rick Steiner is a name that wrestling fans know very well. He was a powerhouse in the ring, especially as one half of the Steiner brothers with his brother Scott. They were tough and intense and won championship after championship. But these days, Rick isn't making headlines for his wrestling. Instead, he's getting attention for all the wrong reasons, his controversial comments and social media activity. All right, let's get straight to it. Rick Steiner has been called out for making some seriously offensive remarks, and we're not talking about just one slip-up. At a wrestling convention in 2023, he reportedly went after wrestler Giselle Shaw, who is transgender, calling her a piece of trash and saying she didn't belong in the business. And this wasn't some behind-the-scenes whisper. It was loud, aggressive, and completely out of line. Witnesses confirmed how uncomfortable it was, and the backlash was immediate. And this isn't new for Rick. He's made multiple transphobic remarks online, using offensive language about transgender people and the LGBTQ+ community. The wrestling world has been pushing for more inclusivity, but Rick's comments have put him at odds with that movement. But it doesn't stop there. There have also been claims that Rick has made racist and xenophobic remarks. While there aren't as many well-documented incidents as with his transphobic comments, multiple people have come forward saying he's made inappropriate remarks about race and nationality. Whether or not these claims are fully proven, they only add to the perception that he holds outdated and harmful views. Now, before you become a keyboard warrior and type how I'm one big liberal son of a biscuit eater, I apologize. I'm extremely sorry for the bait. All these controversies, although big, are irrelevant to me. I just wanted to bring your focus to something bigger. Why did Rick Steiner not get the fame he deserved? Why is Scott Steiner the more famous of the two? The Steiner brothers were a legendary tag team, but Scott eventually outshined Rick. And honestly, there are some pretty clear reasons why. First off, Scott knew how to reinvent himself. He transformed into Big Poppa Pump, a loud, arrogant, and completely OTT character. He had the look, the attitude, and the presence to make him a standout personality in the wrestling world. Fans either loved him or loved to hate him, but either way, they paid attention. Rick, on the other hand, stayed the same. He was always the tough, no-nonsense wrestler who let his in-ring skills do the talking. That's great for respect, but not necessarily for individual fame. Wrestling is as much about personality as it is about ability, and Scott figured out how to keep people entertained for years. Another huge factor, mic skills. Scott was pure gold on the microphone. His promos were wild, unpredictable, and full of energy. He had catchphrases, an intense delivery, and a way of keeping people glued to the screen just to hear what ridiculous thing he'd say next. Rick? Not so much. He was solid, but he didn't have that same larger-than-life presence when it came to talking. And in wrestling, talking is half the battle. Then there's championship success. While both brothers shined in tag team wrestling, Scott went on to win major singles championships, including the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. That took his fame to a whole new level. Rick had some singles success too, but it just didn't compare. Winning a world title cements a wrestler's place in history, and that's exactly what happened with Scott. And let's be honest, Scott had a level of charisma that Rick just didn't. Whether he was flexing his insane muscles, yelling about being a genetic freak, or throwing out crazy insults, he had a way of keeping people entertained. Rick was an incredible wrestler, but he didn't have that same over-the-top personality that made Scott stand out. Do you agree? Or do you think it's all about whose shoulder you're rubbing? Scott was pro at that, let me tell you. Now here's the interesting part. Both Rick and Scott have had their share of controversies. Scott has said plenty of outrageous things, but because of his larger-than-life persona, fans often brushed it off as part of his act. He built his career on being wild and unpredictable, so when he made a controversial statement, it felt like just another big Poppa Pump moment. But Rick, he doesn't have that excuse. His comments don't come off as part of a wrestling gimmick, they come off as personal beliefs, and that's why he's facing a much harsher backlash. Rick Steiner was an important part of wrestling history, and his skills in the ring were undeniable. But in recent years, his name has become more associated with controversy than his wrestling legacy. Meanwhile, Scott remains the more famous of the two, thanks to his ability to evolve, entertain, and stay relevant. Rick was a powerhouse in the ring, but Scott's charisma, promo skills, and championship wins made him the bigger star. While both brothers left a mark on wrestling, their careers and reputations have gone in very different directions. At the end of the day, wrestling is all about evolution. Some stars adapt and keep up with the times, while others get left behind. Scott moved forward. Rick, not so much. And that's why, for better or worse, their legacies have gone in such different directions. For such wrestlers who are left behind, I make these documentaries so fans can relive their prime. No matter how much people deny it, Rick is a legend. And for a legend like him here, I have a quick rundown of his epic career so you and I can relive his great days. Rick Steiner, whose real name is Robert Rex Steiner, was born on March 9, 1961. He is a retired American professional wrestler, best known for his time in World Championship Wrestling, or WCW. Fans loved his tough and intense style in the ring, and he became especially famous for teaming up with his younger brother, Scott Steiner. Together, they formed one of the most dominant tag teams in wrestling history, known as the Steiner Brothers. Before he became a professional wrestler, Rick was a talented amateur wrestler. He attended the University of Michigan, where he competed for the Wolverines and placed second at the Big Ten Championships in 1983. He also qualified for the NCAA tournament and even set a school record by pinning an opponent in just 15 seconds. After earning his bachelor's degree in education, he was introduced to professional wrestling by George "The Animal" Steele, a legendary wrestler himself. Rick decided to jump straight into the world of pro wrestling right after college, and he never looked back. In the early years of his wrestling career, Rick wrestled under his real name, Rob Rex Steiner, before changing it to Rick Steiner. He competed in different wrestling promotions, including the American Wrestling Association, International Wrestling in Montreal, and the Universal Wrestling Federation, or UWF. While in UWF, he teamed up with Sting, and the two of them won the UWF World Tag Team Championship in 1987. That same year, Rick also wrestled in Japan for New Japan Pro Wrestling. Then in 1988, UWF was bought by Jim Crockett Jr., who owned Jim Crockett Promotions, a major part of the National Wrestling Alliance. Rick, along with many other UWF wrestlers, was brought into Jim Crockett Promotions, which later became WCW. In early 1989, Rick's younger brother Scott started coming to the ring with him. Before long, they officially formed a tag team, the Steiner Brothers. They quickly proved they were a force to be reckoned with when they defeated the Freebirds to win their first World Tag Team Championship in November 1989. The Steiner Brothers dominated WCW's tag team division for years, winning multiple championships and also traveling to Japan to compete in New Japan Pro Wrestling, where they had great success as well. In December 1992, Rick and Scott made a big move by leaving WCW and joining its biggest rival, the World Wrestling Federation, or WWF. They made this decision after WCW's management, led by Bill Watts, offered them a disappointing contract extension. Watts also gave them the option to leave their current contracts early, which they took. In WWF, the Steiner Brothers continued to be one of the best tag teams around. They won the WWF World Tag Team Championship twice, both times by defeating the team of Money Inc., which consisted of Ted DiBiase and Erwin R. Shyster. Even though the Steiner Brothers were successful in WWF, they decided to leave in 1994. Rick later said that the reason for their departure was that Vince McMahon, the owner of WWF, didn't keep the promises he had made to them. Because of that, they felt it was best to move on. After leaving WWF, Rick Steiner jumped into Extreme Championship Wrestling (ECW) in April 1995. ECW was all about hardcore no-rules action, and Rick wasted no time making his presence felt. He stepped in for Sabu in a big main event match, and just like that, he was in the thick of it. But the real excitement came when he reunited with his brother Scott. The Steiner brothers were back, and they picked up right where they left off. They won match after match, proving they were still one of the toughest teams out there. They even teamed up with Eddie Guerrero for a match, but came up short. Rick's time in ECW wasn't long, but it was definitely memorable. By the end of the year, he was ready to move on. Next stop, Japan. Rick and Scott took their talents to New Japan Pro Wrestling (NJPW), where they thrived. They won the IWGP Tag Team Championship twice, proving their hard-hitting style worked anywhere. Wrestling in Japan was different, more focused on skill and technique, but Rick adapted fast. The Steiner brothers wrestled full-time in NJPW throughout 1995 before making their way back to WCW in 1996. Even after that, Rick made occasional trips to Japan, including a big match in 2000 against Randy Savage. That match turned out to be Savage's last singles bout, making it a historic moment. In March 1996, the Steiner brothers returned to WCW, making a big comeback on Nitro against the Road Warriors. They lost, but they showed they were still as tough as ever. They quickly got back in the mix, winning multiple tag team championships over the next few years. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. They were stripped of the titles at one point and had fierce rivalries with teams like the Outsiders. And then in 1998, everything changed. Scott turned on Rick and joined the NWO. It was a shocking betrayal. The brothers who had always fought side by side were now enemies. Rick tried to get revenge, but Scott always had the NWO backing him up. Then things got worse. Rick was attacked and suffered a shoulder injury, forcing him to take time off. But Rick wasn't the type to stay down for long. At Halloween Havoc, 1998, Rick finally got his shot at Scott. It was a brutal match and Rick gave it everything he had. In the end, he won, proving he was still the tougher of the two. That same night, he also won the World Tag Team Championship with Buff Bagwell, though that partnership didn't last long, since Bagwell later turned on him. But setbacks never kept Rick down for long. Over the next couple of years, Rick stayed busy in WCW. He teamed up with Kenny Chaos, had another heated feud with Scott, and even won the World Television Championship in 1999. He briefly reunited with the Varsity Club before taking a break in 2000. When he returned in 2001, he surprised everyone by turning against Kevin Nash and joining Scott's faction, the Magnificent Seven. He won the U.S. Heavyweight Championship, but lost it soon after. At WCW's final pay-per-view, Greed, he lost to Booker T. And just weeks later, WCW was sold to WWF, marking the end of an era. Even after WCW shut down, Rick didn't stop wrestling. He competed in Japan and on the independent circuit, still bringing that same intensity to the ring. Every now and then, he and Scott would reunite for tag matches, reminding fans why they were one of the best teams ever. He never made a big return to WWE, but he remained a respected name in the wrestling world. His career was all about toughness, dedication, and never backing down. A true powerhouse, a tag team legend, and a wrestler who always gave the fans a show to remember. Rick Steiner made his debut for Total Nonstop Action Wrestling TNA on June 19, 2002, during the company's very first show. He took part in the 20-man gauntlet for the gold match to crown a new NWA World Heavyweight Champion, but the win went to Ken Shamrock. Rick didn't stick around long. He made a one-night return in October 2003, getting into a brawl with Jeff Jarrett. Then in 2006, he popped up again. On the May 4th episode of Impact, he was teased as a possible tag team partner for Sting at the upcoming Sacrifice pay-per-view. He showed up again on May 11th in a similar role, but nothing really came of it. In 2007, things got more interesting. Rick and Scott reunited at Sacrifice after Scott and Tomko lost a World Tag Team Championship match. The Steiners attacked Tomko, making it clear they were back in business. On the next episode of Impact, they stormed into Jim Cornette's office, demanding a match against Team 3D for the tag titles. But that match never happened. Scott suffered a serious throat injury in Puerto Rico and had to have emergency surgery. Rick still showed up at Slammiversary teaming with Road Warrior Animal as Scott's replacement, but they lost to Team 3D. Rick wasn't done yet. At Victory Road, he interfered in the Match of Champions, stopping the referee when brother Devin was about to pin Kurt Angle. A month later at Hard Justice, Scott finally returned from his injury, and the Steiners got their revenge. They defeated Team 3D and reignited their feud. But Team 3D struck back hard, attacking the Steiners and putting Rick through a table. The rivalry hit its peak in late September when the Steiners challenged Team 3D to a 2 out of 3 falls tables match at Bound for Glory. Team 3D won the first fall by slamming Rick through a table, but Scott evened things up with a Frankensteiner on Brother Ray. Then came the final fall. Scott lifted Brother Ray on his shoulders, and Rick hit his diving bulldog through a table, sealing the win. It was a huge moment for the Steiners. But just a few months later, on January 29, 2008, Rick was released from TNA due to budget cuts splitting the brothers up once again. Even after leaving TNA, Rick didn't stop wrestling. He kept going on the independent circuit, competing in different promotions. On August 9, 2008, he faced Bobby Eaton at Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, but came up short. In 2009, he teamed up with Scott again, and from 2010 to 2011, he continued wrestling for Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. In 2013, the Steiner Brothers won the Preston City Wrestling Tag Team Championships, but lost them the very next day. Later that year, they defeated Eddie Kingston and Homicide at the House of Hardcore 2 event, proving they still had it. Rick kept wrestling here and there for a few more years. On November 5, 2016, he competed in Great North Wrestling, challenging Devin Nicholson for the GNW Canadian Heavyweight Championship, but didn't win. Then in 2019, he made a surprise return to Japan. On September 19th, he teamed up with Kazushi Miyamoto in Tokyo Championship Wrestling and defeated Elliot Russell and Sigmund. That turned out to be Rick's final match. Then came a big moment in 2022. At NXT New Year's Evil, Rick made his first WWE appearance since 1994 to celebrate his son Braun Breaker winning the NXT Championship against Tommaso Ciampa. Just a few months later, on April 1, 2022, Rick and Scott Steiner were inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, cementing their legacy as one of the greatest tag teams of all time. But WWE had one last storyline twist for Rick. On the April 5th episode of NXT, after Braun retained his title, Rick was kidnapped by Joe Gacy and Harland. They locked him up inside a cage, adding a dramatic twist to his brief return. From ECW to Japan to TNA to WWE, Rick Steiner's career was full of twists, turns, and unforgettable moments. Whether teaming with Scott or going solo, he was always a powerhouse in the ring. His legacy as a tag team legend and a fierce competitor will never be forgotten.